Hello everyone, and welcome to the League of Women Voters of the Acton area presentation on how to run for office. I'm Joanne Berry of the Acton Area League of Women Voters, and I'll be moderating the discussion this evening. Our goal is to encourage more people to run for office at all levels by hearing from some of the people who have run and who have served in public office at the local and state levels. Our democracy works best when candidates for office are challenged. Joining me here this evening are four panelists. Each will offer up some thoughts, and then we'll take some questions or just keep questioning each other if that's the case. So our panel this evening includes Mike Gowing, who is a former member of the Board of Selectmen of Acton, and he will talk about running at the local level and about some other things you might consider as you're running. Helen Brady is a former candidate for legislature. She ran last year against Corey Atkins in the district that includes part of Acton and Concord. Helen is from Concord. To my left is Katie Green, a current member of the Board of Selectmen of Acton, who will talk about a little bit of the difference, perhaps, between her two times of running, a 3-year time span, and how things have changed. And Liz Markowitz is the town clerk from Boxborough, who will bring us up to date on the rules and regulations. Liz is an elected clerk, and she has served on the Acton, Boxborough, and Boxborough school committees in the past. As well, each person will talk about why they decided to run in the first place and why would someone want to put themselves out there and serve in public office. So we'll go ahead and start with you, Mike.
Thank you, Joanne. All right, so my reason for running, which was back around 2009, was, well, first of all, I should say that I was apolitical. I didn't particularly lean towards one party or the other. I just believed in service. I volunteered in the town. And when the economy started to fall apart, I was concerned that they were going to start laying off firemen and teachers and the age-old problems that people run into. And I thought with a business background that perhaps we could find other places where we could save money so that we wouldn't have to lay people off, because once you let those people go, they go and find jobs elsewhere. You don't get them back. It's not like a job layoff or in a manufacturing facility. But there were other things that I wanted to accomplish in town. My big goal was that I wanted to put solar panels on the transfer station.
Mission accomplished.
But I guess I should say that if in fact you're interested in running, most people decide they want to run because of some issue, one thing that kind of gets under their skin and they feel as though they want to address it. And it's hard to be elected to a position where you can't just deal with the one issue you're interested in. You have to deal with, in the case of a selectman, the entire town. In the case of a school committee, the entire school district. So it requires you to invest some time and energy, but I can guarantee you that it's well worth it. When I first came to the town and started hanging around here, I probably knew 10 people. Now I would probably say I probably have 200 friends in town. So anyway.
Thank you. Helen.
I was not really considering running until after I had volunteered for Marco Rubio's campaign. I always like to be active and work on different candidates' campaigns. It's important too. They need help always holding signs or whatnot. I got the political bug in my 20s. I worked on several campaigns. I worked on John Silver's gubernatorial. I volunteered for the Tsongas campaign. I got a little disillusioned, honestly, with the Democratic Party only because it was so one-sided, and I thought I'd like to see what this party, Mass GOP, is all about. So I threw myself into that, as I had with the other parties, different races, and I liked it, and I liked the people I met, and you do meet so many people when you start going down this avenue, but honestly, a lot of people talk about, oh, I know you because of your campaign slogan, give him Helen. Well, that came up from a group of my friends. We were just talking about someday when I grow up, I'll run for office and this will be my campaign slogan. So that's really where Give 'em Helen came from. And but I never thought that day would come, especially if you consider I jumped into this race in my district very last minute. April 1st, 2016, if you said, Helen, by the end of this month you're going to be running, I would have said, what are you talking about? I'm not doing this. But what it had inspired me was actually a couple of things, important things. I was disillusioned at the national level. I was hoping to be involved or volunteering my time, very little time, but meaningful time to me. And I just went to a Mass Fiscal Alliance meeting and they just were talking about nobody runs in this state, nobody challenges incumbents. We get the government we deserve because nobody's involved. And if nobody steps up to the plate, then you get what you get. And that's how I felt sort of about the national level. Like, well, this is what we got because nobody wants to run at these local levels. So you can't ever get groomed to jump into another level. So I opened my mouth and I said, boy, it's too late for me to run this year. And somebody said, no, it isn't. So I had to take on the challenge and I got my name on the ballot. But what really drew me to this, to putting my name in, I work full time, I have 4 children, my husband's a teacher in Roxbury, we're a very busy family, was to serve. It's about serving. And I always wanted to serve my country, but I couldn't because it's too late for me to join the military, so that's not happening. But my father, I go back to my parents, how I was raised, and my father's duty to his country, and I thought, you know what, if an 18-year-old kid from Somerville, Massachusetts can go sign up to go fight a war very far away from his safety of his home and his family and his community, well, then I can throw my name in. And that's why I did it. That was the one thing that pushed me, because I held on to those signatures walking into Boston to hand them over at One Ashburton. What am I going to do this? But I just kept thinking of my father, wrote his name up. He wasn't quite 18 years old, and here I was. And that's really what inspired me to do this, to put my name in and run for office. So that's my story.
And what did you find, as you started to campaign and continued in the campaign, what did you find that surprised you, plus or minus?
The pluses, there were a lot of pluses. The people I met, the stories. My position at the Boston Symphony Orchestra is dealing with people and their needs and customer service and things of that nature, and I've been there for almost 30 years. And I love interacting with people, and I love talking to people, and I love politics. And typically the people that will come up to you are people who are also interested. Mm-hmm. So I had some great conversations. There were a few things that I was taken aback, certainly, by my opponent's demeanor towards me in certain situations that I felt weren't very dignified and were somewhat insulting to me as a woman and another woman. That was very off-putting, I have to say. I did have a problem with that. But, you know, you have to roll with the punches. If you're going to put your name out there, you have to get a thicker skin. But as a person who is professional in my career, respectful of other people and boundaries, and just appreciating that somebody else would run, Danny Factor was a kind and gentle person. I enjoyed conversing with him. So, you know, we had very different political platforms, but he and I were so respectful of one another. And
He was running for the Green Party, right?
He was, and he was just a really nice person, and I was so glad that we became friends through that process, and people who supported him, we stood and got signatures together and shared, you know, oh, will you sign his? You know, it was really a great experience. And the people that called and volunteered, and especially the people who came up to me and said, thank you for running, that meant the world to me. It made me realize this is why I'm doing this. I'm doing this for a reason. And what I didn't like, and you brought up the point of politician, I just didn't like being called a politician because I'm not a politician. I'm a citizen that's concerned. I looked at how our representative was voting on fiscal issues, and our state has $100 billion of unfunded liabilities and things that if we care about our programs and we care about funding these different, organizations and causes, we have to get our house in order. And the votes that come from a lot of Democrats in this state, they just, whatever the speaker says goes. So, there's a governor, and he's a wonderful governor, but everything he put forth, and you can look it up at massfiscal.org scorecard, and you can see everything he has done has been overruled. So there's not a whole lot of people cooperating with one another, and it's a one-sided deal up there. You really need to have two parties to have democracy.
So do you think it mattered to people that because I'm quite sure you have not served in an elected office at the local level?
No, I don't think so, because the essence of me running was to be a citizen that's concerned for the future of the Commonwealth, and also to bring shed some light on the fact that there really isn't any transparency, and that term limits is something that we really have to think about, at least for Speaker of the House, because we all know the history of the speakers. Once they did have term limits for the speaker up until Finneran.
Now they just have terms.
Now they just have, right. And Finneran, and you know what happened. There were three speakers after that, and then DeLeo did the right thing and brought back George Kovorian's term limits for the speaker. But then when his term was up, everybody voted to keep him in and throw out the term limits for the speaker. So at the very least, that should be back. And our rep, again, didn't vote for that. So it's things of that nature, not really social issues. I think we're all pretty much on the same side when it comes to people, human rights and whatnot. But in terms of fiscal, if we all want the things we want and to support the causes that are important to us all, we've got to get our fiscal house in order, and it is not. And it doesn't look like it's going to be for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move to Katie.
Sure, thank you, Joanne. So I ran because, like most people, I was asked to run, and like most women, I was asked multiple times to run by a number of people in town who knew me from different organizations that I'd been a part of, and because I formerly worked for one of the state reps in Acton. And I come from a background and a family that is very dedicated to public service. My father was on our school committee in my town for 18 years, so I understood a little bit about town government. I've always gone to town meeting and loved doing that, and wanted, when I was asked, felt like it was a good opportunity and that I potentially had something to add. So I decided to put my name in the ring. At the time, there was one selectman who was not running for re-election. There were 2 seats up, and all of a sudden there were 4 of us in the race for 2 open seats, including 1 incumbent. So it was definitely a contested election. I had a lot of support, and I'm very grateful for that, and through a lot of hard work, was able to win. And then 3 years later, I decided to run for re-election. And in that time, the incumbent and I, now also an incumbent, both decided to run again. And I think in part that might have scared other people off, or there just wasn't a lot of interest. And so we were the only 2. So my second race was an uncontested race. So it was significantly different from the first one, as there was really no campaigning. We didn't hold any debates. I believe the league hosted a candidates night. I think it actually might have been here at ActonTV. I can't quite remember, where we just sort of gave answers to questions, as opposed to the formal debates that we did. I think we did 3 or 4 in my first campaign, and there was no need to call people or to ask for their support or hold out signs or anything like that. So there were 2 very different campaigns, and both fortunately successful.
Have you noticed other folks who've run at the local level from the board? Does there seem to be any change in how campaigns go locally over the past, 6, 8 years, something like that?
Well, I'd have to say the past few elections that have actually been contested in town, I haven't seen as much campaigning as I think since the election Janet and I ran in when it was first contested. The last few elections there haven't been as many lawn signs out, whether for school committee or for Board of Selectmen. There have been some letters to the editor, but not as many. And I think fewer debates than what I remember from when I ran. So I would say it seems like they haven't been sort of as fiercely fought in some ways at the local level in the past few years. But honestly, there have also been fewer contested elections since I first ran. So I think there's some ebb and flow to it. I think, like I said, a lot of times when incumbents run for re-election, people feel like they won't have a good chance, and so they often don't run, and then the elections end up being uncontested, which I think is unfortunate. Even though it was nice not to have to campaign, in a lot of ways I wish that there had been a campaign, because I think it brings a lot more people out, engages them more in town, and gets a lot more people interested in what the board is doing and talking about and what the major issues are. And I also think that it's huge to prepare people for joining a board. So I felt much like I had a much better grasp on some of the issues going into the board when I was first elected, because you had to learn them for debates and for putting together handouts and things like that. Whereas I think if you came on and didn't run in a contested election, you didn't necessarily have to do some of that legwork, and so there's a lot steeper of a learning curve. It's steep either way, but I think having to really thoroughly vet the issues and my positions on some of them, and just learn about a little bit more about how a town is run, gave me a greater foundation when I first joined the board. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll come back around to that point, I think, in a little bit. Liz will fill us in on the rules and regulations, as well as why you.
Well, should I start? I'll start off with why. Well,
Yes.
I'm currently the elected town clerk in Boxborough. Probably statewide, there's about 60% of us that are elected, and the other 40% are appointed. Acton has an appointed town clerk. So it's an unusual position in some ways, because it's actually a function. It's not just something where you can go and meet once a week and make decisions. I actually perform a governmental role, run elections, and et cetera. But I enjoy being elected. It means that one of the things, if you run for office, you have to be a registered voter yourself. So that's something. Many, all towns have a mix of appointed and elected boards. So appointed ones, typically you can be a resident and be appointed by the Board of Selectmen or whoever's the appointing authority. But to run for any office, whether it's Board of Selectmen or Planning Board or for state rep, you have to first start out by being a registered voter in the town that you are a resident of. So that's just one of the basics, so you have to be at least 18. But I got into politics or into town government. I moved into Boxborough in like 93 or 4, and it was really growing at that time. And my first town meeting was for a school override to expand the grammar school, and it failed. So that Mike said, don't get into, don't run just because you've got one issue, but that is really what got me going and thinking about running for school committee. There was an opening, somebody had resigned, had moved, so I ran for an open seat on the local school committee and was elected. But and it was just, the school committee is a very, very exciting, I guess, you all know that, right? There's a lot that happens in the school committee. You really are tapping in to an area that people have just a lot of interest in and investment in, and that has its good and its bad points when you're on school committee, but it is never dull. You learn a lot. The school administration, by and large, is just a terrific group of people that you get to work with. And in general, especially I enjoyed working, we were regionalized now even more so, but working with colleagues in Acton. So that was fun, because there aren't many boards. Most boards are very town specific, but when the school committee is an example of where you really get to meet people from another community. So that was interesting. So, and then the school, so I was there for like 9 years. And then our town clerk retired, and I had been the chair of the Democratic Town Committee, and so I'd been involved in elections and campaigns for various candidates, Jamie, Pam, and so I decided to run, and no one else ran. And so I just got right in there. So, and so now I run elections. So I would just say, there are, as I said, there's a mix of appointed and elected boards. So if you do want to get on the ballot for like planning board, board of health, board of selectmen, school committee, what else is elected?
Library trustees.
Library trustees, these are all elected boards, and you have to get on the ballot. And you start off by being a registered voter and then going to see your town clerk, because you need to get nomination papers and get a certain number of signatures from other registered voters in your community. And there's deadlines and all that kind of stuff. So the first person to see really is the town clerk, who will give you all the information on what you need to do. But generally, you get your signatures, and then you put you pass them in to the clerk, and hopefully you've got the right amount of signatures, and then you get on the ballot, and then you get your. Some people run by themselves and fund their own campaign, but if you're going to raise money, you generally get a committee together that has a treasurer, and then you have to go and do things like campaign finance, reporting, and so there's some things that you need to be aware of before really completely plunging in. But again, the clerk will help you with that. Also, the state has a really great website. Secretary of State has a really great website for people running at all levels, state and local. And like how to run for office in Massachusetts. This is one of the things you can download. And they've got all sorts of links that give you information on what you need to do. But I guess the first thing is to make sure you know what you're getting into. It's good to have gone to the board's meetings to see what it's all about. But in general, most of these positions just need you to be interested. Probably the Board of Health, it's good if you're like a civil engineer or if you've got some background there, but that's not even required. There's a lot of things you can learn from the other board members and the administration that supports you. So it's not like you're alone when you go and you join a board. You've got others there, and anyway, I just think it's a really great way, as somebody said, to meet other people, to get involved in your community, and really have an impact on what's happening in your town.
Thank you. Do any of our audience members have any questions that you thought that you came with, or that you've thought of since you got here? Don't be shy. Go ahead.
My question is, can you talk a little bit about websites or social media and how you use those in your campaign, and whether or not you use that at all after the campaign?
Sure, that's good. You want to start off, Katie?
Sure. Well, I was very lucky to have somebody that I knew in town volunteer, actually his daughter, to help me make a website. So I made a website for my campaign. I believe it's Katie Green for Acton. com, but don't quote me on that. As you can tell, I haven't used my website in a long time. I really only use it for the campaign, but it was a great place to put my stance on some issues that were coming up in town, as well as to put various endorsements that I had received or links to letters to the editor or things like that, and just a little bit about my background, as well as a link for how you could donate to my campaign. And then in terms of social media, I am young, but I'm not a huge user of social media. So I used Facebook, and I still use it occasionally. So for example, on Monday night, I'm very proud to say that the board adopted a townwide Board of Selectmen policy on immigration. And so that was something I thought was important. There was a Beacon article on that, and I shared that on Facebook. So I try to use it mostly for sharing information about town, things that are going on in town, or if there's an important town meeting coming up or an election, I try to remind people of that, or something like tonight, or sharing things that the League of Women Voters or other organizations are doing. But like I said, I haven't used my website very much since my campaign, so I think if you go on there, it's all still pretty dated from 2013, but I do try to keep up a little bit on Facebook primarily.
Thank you. Did you use social media?
I did. I created a website. This fellow I worked with on some professional stuff with where I work, I called him up and I said, could you do this? And he actually lived in Carlisle, and he said, I would love to do this. And so he did it for me, thank God, because it's not easy making a website, and I gave up within about a minute. So he put the website together. I use social media, Facebook. I had, of course, the endorsements you want to put on your website, any that you can get, testimonials about you, your character, things you want people to know about you personally. You don't want to divulge a whole lot just because your family needs to have their privacy. So I think I made mine pretty user-friendly, and there's also, you also want to, talk about fundraising. There's a button, for people to donate. I used, it's called Nation Builder, and that was just something that a lot of different candidates use as their platform in that web world. And I had actually Tom Brady endorse me, which was a lot of fun. So we put that video up on
Brady on Brady.
Yeah, that's good.
And actually we did one take, and it was very fun. It was all tongue-in-cheek, and we had a blast doing it. So, you never know who's gonna raise their hand and say, I'll endorse you. Governor Baker came out. I put him, front and center, of course. He's the most popular governor in the country. So, so it was, that part actually was fun, just making sure you take the pictures and you put them up. You have to, remember to post them, show where you are, what you're doing, that you're interacting with the voters. So, yeah, it's
And did you get feedback to know how you were reaching folks that way?
Yes. So people they got my Gmail, so I would get comments from people, and some of them were kind of not very nice, but most were very nice. This you're going to get that, so you have to decide whether you're going to respond to some of those emails. And for the most part, again, you have to learn to roll with it. I'm not afraid to speak my mind, so a little bit of being on, the spotlight. I bit my tongue a few times. I'm not going to lie. And that's a little bit of a negative when you run, is that you're aware that everybody's looking, and and especially the first time out, you don't want to say something that could get twisted the wrong way. So you're very self-conscious of how you are, what you're talking about. And when you run for the first time and you're somebody who is not a politician, it's the hard part is just having the confidence to be you, and this is who I am. I'm better one-on-one. I love, speaking to people one-on-one. I hate public speaking. My husband is always like, because he can hear it. He knows me well enough to hear in my voice when I'm just getting uncomfortable. But social media is a whole other thing because you're just responding and posting, and it's, you know, put out your best face, really.
So I think that could bring us to a point of what you need to do to prepare yourself to run, because like you said, you are going to get some comments that aren't favorable, may even be worse than that. You got to know what the committee does. You know, don't just get elected and show up for your
Can I
first
make,
meeting.
it made me think when Helen was talking, when you run for a local office, party doesn't really matter, but if you're going to be running for a state office, in general, I mean, you can run an independent campaign, but in general, you have to go through the primaries and be a registered Republican or Democrat or Green Rainbow or Libertarian. So
Or unenrolled.
unenrolled,
yeah.
you can skip that, but you can't run you know, as a Democrat or Republican unless
Right.
you're in those parties. So that's something to think about.
So Mike, when you were, you know, you said things drew you out, but what did you have to do to prepare to serve on the selectmen as opposed, say, one of the other committees or boards that might have addressed your
I
issues?
was the chairman, the vice chair of the Council on Aging when someone approached me the same way about you should run for office, and so I hadn't really thought about it because, as I said, I'm an independent. I'm apolitical. It was not about politics, even though I was a young Republican, by the way.
And I was a young
Elliot
Democrat, by the
Richardson.
way.
But it's the way it works. But I think and as far as the social campaign or social media campaign, I ran more of an antisocial campaign. The first race that I was in was very contested and very ugly and a lot of bad things, and I was appalled. I was stunned at the vituperation that came out of people who didn't know me at all because I was a virtual unknown in town. That took some kind of trying to build some momentum because I didn't have children in the school systems, which is a good way for you to meet other people in town. I didn't have that going for me, so it was kind of like everything was from the first time. One thing I have to differ with you on is I ran unopposed in the second one, and my thought process on it was, it's because I'm doing a good job.
I hope that's why I
That's
ran
why. I'm
unopposed,
telling you,
but I
Katie,
don't,
that's
I don't
the
always
reason why.
know. And we've had a couple campaigns also where there were open seats recently, and they weren't, you know, there were just as many people as there were seats, and so they ended up being unopposed as well. So, you know, again, I hope, I would like to think that people felt I was doing a good job, or at least, you know, I think you were mentioning before we started rolling that I haven't angered, you know, more than half the town yet, so that's a good thing. But you know, you never know. I think sometimes it can be intimidating to people to run against incumbents.
Is that what did you run against an incumbent?
No, not
The
my
first
first time.
time?
No, there
Did
was
you,
one
Mike?
incumbent.
No,
Oh, so it was an open seat that
it was
had
an open
multiple
seat,
people.
but
Right.
multiple candidates ran for. So.
Okay.
Right.
And to the point that you were asking, which was, well, how did that make you feel? You feel like on any given day, half the people don't like you. And then on any other given day, the other half don't like you. So it's a no-win situation. You just throw yourself out there. But that's kind of why you have to really think about what your position is on things. It isn't, you can't let, or you shouldn't let polling or the general consensus around town steer the way you think. You have to vote your own heart. You're elected to represent the entire community. That includes Democrats and Republicans and Green Party members and everybody else. They're all your constituents now, and they all need to be represented. So you can't kind of lock in and do things that, well, I know more Democrats, so I'm going to do what the Democrats want, or I know more Republicans, I'm going to do what the Republicans want. You have to be your own person. And now, in life, that's difficult enough. In politics, it's very difficult because you get a lot of pressure massed up against you if people disagree with you. I've had hate mail from England, so I know.
And Joanne, to get to some of the, you were sort of talking about what are the things you should do if you want to run at a local level. So you mentioned going to the meetings of the board you want to be on. That is huge and seems obvious, but not everybody does that. So make sure you go to some of the meetings of the board, really kind of start to understand what is this board about and what are the issues that you have to deal with if you're on the board. I think a lot of people join the Board of Selectmen and think that maybe we have more say over the schools than we really do. We have very little, or think it's all just dealing with the town budget. But you know, you're the liquor licensing board, you're the sewer commissioners. If there's a dog bite, it comes to you. Site plan permits, lawsuits, it's all over the place. And so trying to get a sense of that by going to all of the meetings. If you're thinking about running for the Board of Selectmen, you should attend meetings of other committees in town. Luckily I had some good people who were advising me, and I must have gone to, you know, I don't know, a few dozen meetings when I was running, just to get a sense of what are the other boards and committees in town and what are the issues they are dealing with, and trying to move on in town, because they're almost all of the boards and committees are advisory to the Board of Selectmen. So you want to know what they're dealing with, and in Acton, as board members, you'll be a liaison to a number of those committees. So starting to get to know people that way is really important. And then I would say make sure that you have a good support network, whether that's your family or friends or just people in town who support you, who will be there, you know, to listen to you and to help you when you do get hateful or angry things said at you. It's just going to happen. And so, you know, having somebody who can listen to you vent about that is important. And then having people who also can advise you. So I would say talking to both current and former members of the board that you want to serve on is really important as well, to learn what were their experiences. Ask them things like, how many hours do you spend on this? You know, what's the thing that most surprised you? You know, or what, you know, do you like least about this, and what do you love about it? So you can really try to figure out, does this fit with what, you know, I want to try to accomplish in town or on this board? And is it the right fit for me? Do I have the right temperament, and do I have the resources to put into this job? So those are some of the things I think you should think about if you're considering running, especially at the local level. And it's very different, you know, I mean, it's harder. I think running at the local level is just very interesting, because you know a lot of people and you see them more often than, say, if you're running at, you know, at a state level in a state district, or then if you're running, you know, for state senate or at a national level, because you're more and more removed from the people that, you know, you see every day and that you're representing. You know, I get stopped more times than I'd want in the grocery store or on the street, or I take the train, and, you know, and I used to take a commuter shuttle, and you know, sometimes you just kind of want to step away from it, but you really can't. And so you need to also know that if you're running at the local level, you live in this town all the time, and so people are going to go to you.
That
and
doesn't
have
go away
access
after
to you.
you're off the board either.
No, exactly.
I'll just give you a hint.
Yeah, and people always think I know everything that's happening, and sometimes I have no idea. So, but yeah, it's also a very good thing, though, because you do feel very connected to the people that, you know, you are representing, and can hear from them, and that's extremely important. So
So that does bring up, I think, a couple of good points there. One, the time commitment and being familiar with what that is for the duration of the term.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good question that people should ask themselves. Are you willing to put in the time for 3 years or 2 years or whatever the term is? Of course, if something comes up in your life, then
It comes up.
it comes up, and
Yeah.
you may have to change your plan. But think about, can you sustain that effort for that amount of time, and having people to work with you. It's not an individual sport, which I've told people before.
It's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I think that is a
So
good way to-
what are some ways that you guys figured out to make sure that it wasn't an individual sport? Because Katie made some good points about, you know, making sure you have people, but also, yeah, there's plenty of
Yeah.
people willing to build a website, but there are other
Right.
things too.
Right. Networking, you were talking about speaking to figure out, what does this job entail? If you're just running for office for the first time, and again, I had no idea what I was getting into, even though I'd worked on campaigns, the extent of your network is important. Fortunately, I do know a fair number of people through my professional life, so I could reach out, and having worked on different campaigns on both sides of the aisle, I had a lot of people that I would ask, so how many hours really is this job, and can I do it? And a question that often came up with me, because I'm a working mother, is are you going to have time to do this job? And I think people who know me well, I go pretty much 24/7. And so one woman, I remember the night of the election, held a sign up and said, she will be a full-time, it wasn't my sign, she will be a full-time rep. And it was against me, saying, and it was another woman, believe it or not, and her husband. And I just went up, I said, oh, I didn't realize that she was part-time rep. And they said, no, we're talking about you, because you're a working mother. And I just was so offended by that. I was like, are you kidding me? Get to know, most importantly, make sure people know, try to get out as much as you can. We're all limited for time, to get people to know us, to know who is Helen Brady. Well, nobody really, I mean, I've volunteered on, at my church, at the schools, whenever I can, and also go to work. But as much, be who you are is important, but do network, do reach out to state reps that your former state rep. My mother used to work in the State House a long time ago. I called this rep that she worked in that office, and he was very helpful. State Rep Dave Nangle in Lowell, he's a Democrat. He endorsed me. He definitely got some slack for that, for doing that, but he spoke to me and he said, I think we agree on a lot. I think you'd be an asset up here on Beacon Hill. So it's good to network out there and reach out to whoever is a politician, former, current, so that you can understand what is your job. And I'll tell you, state reps, it's all over. It's what that person wants to make of it. It's how involved they want to be. It really, there's no punching in and punching out. It's not that kind of a job from what I could gather. So,
Helen, could I ask a question? Did you find that your Republican town committee or any of the state Republican, did I say Democrat or did I say
no,
Republican?
you said it.
Republican, good, okay. Were they helpful?
They were, the Mass GOP is so much smaller than the Massachusetts Democratic Party. So their resources are limited, but Karen, Lieutenant Governor, came out, Karen Polito walked around town with me. Yeah. Governor Baker came out. I did a big rally in town the Sunday before Election Day. So, but it's not as expansive.
You didn't have like a built-in bunch of people who could get sign carriers for you and
my friends.
Your friends.
My friends, my family. I'm from the South Shore originally, so I'm like, you all have to get up here and hold a sign in Carlisle, and then you're going. Then we're going to Acton, and then we're going back to Concord, and then we rotated, and that's what we did.
I have to say the same. I didn't know many people in town. As I said, I probably knew 10 people in town when I was running for office. And so I asked my family to help out, and I had my nephews come out from Boston, which is where I'm from originally, and they were holding signs at the transfer station. They said, we're holding signs at the dump?
Yeah.
I know. Everybody said go to the
They were shocked.
But I think that makes a good point too. It's like, know your community. Where
What's
because
the issues?
Everyone knows if you are doing any kind of politicking in Acton, you darn well
Go
better
to the transfer station.
Sure, and I was driving through Lynn the other day, and they have a big election coming up, and there was very clearly kind of this one rotary in area that all of the politicians and their supporters were standing on. I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I said to my boyfriend, I was like, this is where they go in town, and it's different than we go to the dump. I spent a number of Saturdays standing at the dump with my family and friends holding signs.
And when I asked the question, they said, well, because only Actonians can go to the transfer station. So therefore, you're only talking to voters. You're only looking at voters.
Right.
Whereas if you go to the library, people from
Yeah.
Boxborough and Carlisle and all around the area also go to those libraries. So if you want to get just people who are potential voters for you, you go to where they are.
It's a good place to get signatures for your
Yes.
nomination
Yeah.
papers.
Yeah.
You
also.
all know, you know they're all from eligible.
Right,
voters.
exactly.
The other thing that was different too was the 2 weeks before voting. You know how people could vote for 2 weeks.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
They just started
new,
that.
and it's
new.
only
Early
in
voting.
presidential
That was insane.
elections.
It's in. I think it's going to be in state. Like I think it's going to be 2018, 2020.
Is it?
I think it
Okay.
is.
I thought I heard just.
So,
We'll find
Liz,
out.
could you just
We'll find out.
clarify the early voting, what that means?
Well, people are probably aware of that we have absentee voting, but this past presidential election, we had early voting, which was a 2-week period before the presidential election, and people could just come in. I'm sure you know your town hall was open, and people could just come in anytime and cast a ballot, and not have to say that they're going to be out of town, because absentees really are for people who are not going to be in town during the election. So this open voting was just early voting was for pure convenience, just so that you didn't have to figure out, okay, so do I get up and get in line by 6:30 a.m. to get out the door, or can I
they were
hope that
also-
I get home in time to?
They were also concerned about lines.
Well, that's it.
They were trying to minimize the
Right,
the
because
impact.
that is, there's huge, the presidential elections are huge, and you don't want people getting discouraged because the line's too long, they don't want to wait or whatever. So I think it was, in Boxborough, it was a great success. I think in general throughout the state, voters really, really liked it. I don't know if anybody took advantage of it, but it just was something to get
Let
it
the
off.
record show the audience all the heads.
Yeah, What was really cool is that everyone went on. I just know, on Facebook, I voted today. There's this huge Facebook thing, and I think that really helped feed in to people getting out and doing it. I mean, we still had people who were very traditional, and they feel like but we were open on the election day too, and frankly, all that early voting really helped on election day as well, because the lines for people who wanted to vote then were a third of what they had been 4 years earlier. So I think it was, it's here to stay,
But
and it was very
probably
helpful.
not for local elections.
It's not for local elections, nope.
But
Which-
statewide.
Statewide
Yeah, it
elections.
was
I'm
tough.
pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Somebody
Okay.
told me the other night it was presidential,
So-
and I thought that wasn't right. But
I don't think so. Yeah, it's for. It'll be. I think it'll be there 2018 for the governor's race.
It became like election day every day for 2 weeks.
It was election. Yeah.
Because you had to put people, I did anyway, my campaign, we put people at every poll as
Counting. Oh yeah.
for 2
Yeah,
weeks.
right.
It
That's
was not
that's
easy,
hard.
and
Yeah.
some days it rained, but
Yeah.
we were out there at some place every day. So
And
it
that-
was
well,
tough though. It wasn't-
Another thing people can do is, I think you can request, the list of voters from that day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think candidates will get better at figuring out how to work with that system
Yeah.
and to make sure
Well,
their
the
vote
town
gets
hall
out.
had issues too with
It was the first.
paraphernalia being left inside, and
yeah.
it was dicey for at least the first couple of days.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so-
we were all trying to figure out how to do this.
But they've managed successfully in many other states.
Oh, yeah.
So presumably.
Oh yeah,
that
I
will
think
only expand.
we are not looking back. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So another question that we might consider is both when you're running and after you've been elected, how do you hear back from voters? Of course, we've heard some of that. Katie gets
store.
talked
It really
Well,
depends
at a
on not
local-
to hear back from
no,
voters.
I mean, I don't hear. Sometimes you don't hear as much as you like. I always say, and I told this to my boss when I worked for a state rep, as I mentioned, and I try to remember myself, is that you tend to hear from people when they're angry. So the times that our meeting room is full, and the times that we get the most emails are often when people are upset about something, and that's completely understandable because that often is what sparks, somebody to be passionate enough to want to come to a meeting or to write an email or to make a phone call, or if there's a particular divisive issue that a group maybe is kind of getting people organized around, then you'll get a lot of the same emails. On the Board of Selectmen, the way we've traditionally handled constituent emails, well, I've been on the board at least, is that if they come to our sort of general email shell where it goes to all of the selectmen, just the chair responds. But people can also email us individually. My email's on the town's website. I have cards with it. You can contact me anytime. And I do get some of that. So we hear that way, but a lot of it, I think, at a local level is either one-on-one conversations with people running into you in town or at different events. So I try to go to a lot of, different events if I can, emailing you, or just showing up at our meetings or at town meeting to express themselves. So it's not, like I said, we don't. There's very few thank yous in the job, which is fine. I'm not expecting that, but just know that going in, you're going to mostly hear from the people that are upset with you, and sometimes you get the thank you, but a lot of times you don't. So
Katie,
just know
thank
that.
you.
Thanks, Mike. And thank you for your many years.
Now you at least have one.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't keep a tally. No.
You're going to have to work at it.
Oh, jeez. I know. I did get a few myself after, but when the pay raise went through, I'm like, listen, it never came up once in any debate, so I can't. Should have voted for me.
Is there anything that, both in running or serving, that has surprised you? You didn't even think of, came out of the blue?
Yeah. When I first got elected, I was in grad school and had to drop out because most of the things you do are in the evening. A lot of the events you go to, the meetings you have, it's the people, because people work during the day. And so that was not, on the positive side, I'm glad I didn't get that graduate degree anyway. So.
Yeah.
You saved yourself money
Exactly,
by
it saved
running
me
for
a bundle.
office.
So.
But that's a good point. Most of
Most
the
of the
evenings
meetings
for
are in the
most
evening.
committees,
Yeah.
or some conversely are at 7 o'clock in the morning. There's some that are because folks are
Right.
booked up in the evenings.
Well, one thing I noticed about running is, you know how usually you're just going about people. You do get in more conversations. I mean, it does make you, and when you have opposition, because it makes you reach out and hear other points of view, and I think it just makes you more open to hearing what is happening in your community. It gets you back in touch. If you've gone for 3 years doing what you're doing, it gets you back out there talking to people. And when you're a candidate, people approach you as they wouldn't if you were, just, going about your day. So I think it's really a time for some more getting input and absorbing information and getting different points of view that you may not be getting. So I think that's refreshing in some ways when you win.
Yeah.
When you win. Yeah.
So
That's the
are
thing.
you considering running for anything? I mean, it
well,
wouldn't necessarily have to be
I
the
actually
same
am the board
thing.
of
but-
registrars, so I forgot
Okay.
to say I actually won that one, but so I think what was a little bit more not shocking, but also something that was very out there in terms of you're a Republican, and I'm like, I'm a Republican in Massachusetts, okay.
It's Democrat light.
It's Democrat light. And so
But still.
and people would say, I absolutely I just can't vote for Republican. If you were Democrat, I would vote for you, And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I think I'm always about, I've voted for every party. I have my Pearl buttons, I have my Nader buttons, I voted for Weldon Johnson. Like, I vote the party, the person over the party. I've always been that kind of a voter. So it was shocking to me where people were very just, no, I will not vote for you because you're Republican. And I think people really need to be educated, and I hope the league takes the initiative to present both parties as evenly as possible, even if you don't agree with them on certain issues, but to make sure, especially if women run, that you get 100% backing of the league. I felt a little bit on the outside, honestly, but I've spoken to a few people that have been so kind to me. So I'm glad that, I was able to, make a bridge.
You didn't answer the question.
What?
You plan on running again?
Oh God!
Don't worry about
True
that.
politician, right?
Oh, that was a great pivot.
But I think one of the things that happens when women run and don't win is they don't run again, where that's less of the case with men. And I will say the league is nonpartisan, absolutely. I just want to make that clear. We support neither parties nor oppose.
And it's open to men. I am
Yes,
a member of the League
yes.
of Women Voters.
And we
so-
have a few men in the group, and we do have a question from the audience.
I just wanted to ask, I don't know if you can hear me. I want to ask, you're listening to you guys talk about who's running and what is the ideal candidate? Is it a retiree, a stay-at-home mother, a full-time worker? Who should be running for these offices?
Anybody.
Everybody.
Citizens. I think we
Voters.
got that.
But do
Voters,
understand
yeah.
the
Registered
commitment. I
voters.
sort of say to people, I think for the Board of Selectmen, at least the way that I choose to engage with the board, I feel like I could have a family, a full-time job. I could have two of the three of a family, a full-time job, or being on the Board of Selectmen. I have a full-time job right now in Boston, so I commute about 3 hours a day, and I'm on the Board of Selectmen. I don't have any children right now, and I think that that's why I'm able to do that at this point. I do think it would be very difficult if I had all three, but you have to have a supportive. My boyfriend's extremely supportive of me, and that helps a lot. My family is very supportive of me, and you need that. And frankly, my boss is very supportive of me when I need to leave early to get back for a number of meetings or come in late because I have a meeting. I think everybody should consider running, but do know what the time commitments of a position are, and figure out if it's the right one for you right now. Maybe it's not, and so for a few years you want to do something a little more low-key, but be on, volunteer on a board or committee, or be a part of the League of Women Voters and help organize
Events like this.
Yeah.
Yes. I am going to. We can still
Okay.
talk, but I do want to give the closing because we have been here for an hour.
Oh my God.
First of all, thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your experience and encouraging people to run, because democracy does not work without people running. Do go to the Massachusetts Secretary of the Commonwealth, or Secretary of State, as he is more commonly known, for information, as well as League of Women Voters of Acton area. We have a very handy checklist of things to consider, which mostly we have talked about here this evening, but it's all in a handy list for you. It is available on the website, and the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts also has resources. So thank you, and good night.